Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the Simgot SuperMix 4. So this is almost the latest set by Simgot. I think the EM10, I don't know, maybe edged it out by a day or so. They were both released about the same time, but this is the one that I have in my hand. I will get an EM10, but it's not here yet. So this is SuperMix 4. There are 4 different drivers in a shell that I think you can not see anything in there at all, but there you go. It says SuperMix 4 on the side. You get a nice design on the faceplate. Nice shell. Kind of a little different than their other ones. This one is resin with bore tubes, and so pretty nice. Definitely a nice build quality as kind of what you're expecting at about $140. I think that is what this one retails for. This is the cable, which is nice and velcroed to the case. And those of you who have Simgot prior sets, you will recognize that case. It's the same one they've been using for quite a while. So definitely a nice SPC style cable. No complaints on it. It's actually nice and color coordinated with the SuperMix 4 itself. So kind of get the gunmetal gray and gunmetal gray. I think they got all that theming done quite well. This is the box. There's nothing really in the box other than the case. So we will jump into it at that point and say, what is it? This one, of course, is SuperMix 4. The 4 kind of resembles the 4 drivers. So a dynamic driver, balanced armature, a planar, and a piezo. So that's what's special about this one. EM6 was just a hybrid of dynamic drivers and balanced armatures. This one does use additional style drivers, a microplanar and a piezo. So what does this one sound like? I would say this is the most balanced U-shaped Simgot yet. I think they maybe took feedback from all their prior sets and put it, applied, kind of a, compensation, or let's fix some of the things that people were annoyed about on their other sets. So I think going back on EM6L, it was a little bit overly warm. I think EA500LM, a little bit too bright. Better balanced than EA500, right? There's no nozzles, foam, tuning filters. People do crazy things to get the balance right in EA500. And then EA1000, I think that's the harder one. I think that one was actually a really nice set. But it kind of required a little bit of fine tuning on the nozzles, required some pairing. It was a little hard to get right. And I think when the people who got that one right, I think it's an amazing set. The people who kind of listened to it and didn't put time in to figure out what works best for them, I think they said, it's okay, maybe not worth the money. But so this one I think is sort of the one that works best out of the box because they went through and fixed a bunch of the issues from prior sets. So does this one still lean bright? I think this one still does. And I think most of the sets that we call Harman tend to be modified Harmans. They tend to have a little bass boost. Maybe they are a little ear gain, pulled back a little bit. Those are what I would call modified Harman. This one is, SM4 is definitely Harman on rails. And what I mean by that is it's pretty much exactly the Harman target. So the Harman target is actually there, but it's under the red line, which is the graph of SuperMix 4. It pokes out just about there, and it kind of pokes out here. But the rest of it, this is about as Harman as you get. Harman 2019 tends to be their go-to. They do a Simgot flavor of Harman 2019. This one is almost dead on Harman 2019. So that will appeal to some people. Some people will kind of pass and say, Harman isn't my thing. But yeah, this one is pretty much Harman on rails. Lots of sub bass, a lean lower mid. Then you have energetic upper mids, and that gives you that engaging female vocals at the expense of male vocals. Much more noticeable when you're raising the volume as well. This one, that Harman, that ear gain definitely hits you when you turn up the volume. So is there anything special about SM4 other than the 4 different drivers? Yeah, I think they priced it like a 1+1, but definitely more resolving than sets at the same price point. And second, the dynamic driver they choose and the control that it has and the quality that they used, that is the secret weapon on SM4. And I'm a big believer in dynamic drivers on hybrids. It makes or breaks sets, because if you get a slow dynamic driver that's kind of too bloated or too slow or doesn't pair with the faster drivers, that just throws off, the quality that you're going to get from all of the drivers put together. And they actually nailed that really well. So third, and I will say maybe the treble, I think the lack of peakiness and a lack of or lack of incoherence. I think that they did actually pulled off the treble pretty well, considering there's 4 drivers, a piezo, and a planar are doing treble. I think they actually got that well. I think Simgot in general does treble well, and I think they pulled it off here as well. But I think that was an area where Quintet was one that didn't pull off that as much as it should have. So do I think it's better than Dusk? No. I think if you EQ both of them to your preferences, I do think Dusk has better drivers and a 2 dynamic driver. And I think those are really hard to beat. I think Moondrop does really nice driver design / acquisition / their driver. The drivers they use in their higher end sets tend to be very, very nice. And Dusk is no different. SM4, a little bit cheaper. Maybe the drivers aren't quite at the Moondrop level, but pretty close. So will you have a fear of missing out if you just own SM4 as opposed to going all the way to Dusk? I would say no. I think when you tune them both to your preferences, they're both amazing sets and really quite nice values. Really nice hybrid design, really nice drivers in both of them. But as I said, I think Dusk, the 2 dynamic drivers, the quality of their microplanar, the quality of their balanced armatures, Moondrop tends to be pretty spot on, and Dusk is no different there. So is it better than a pure planar set? I would say no, not quite. I say that, and I said the same thing with Dusk. These sets are really trying to close the gap on resolution and detail, but do it without planar timbre and without adding too many drivers, which adds to the price, right? SM4 is, only $140. It's very affordable for a hybrid set, but it doesn't really have some of the downsides to planars that people kind of get really annoyed on. The planar timbre, the staging being too flat, too bright, a lot of those things that if you are planar curious and have always been turned away by some of the negative things that people have impressions on planars, I think SM4 is the safer choice in that respect. So is it the perfect $150 king? And I will say again, like I said on almost every Simgo set, tuning is a preference. And if Harman is the way for you, then yes, this is the $140 set king that is going to be perfect for you. If Harman is not your thing, then you prefer a different $150 king. You can't change your preferences and say, well, this reviewer said this is the most amazing $150 set, so it must be the best one out there. That only applies if your preference is Harman style tuning, and that is not what everyone prefers. And I'm not a huge fan of really strict Harman. It needs a little bit of something to it that we'll get into later, but if that's your thing, then yes, this is the $150 king. Otherwise, go pick another one. So sound, I would say it's pretty much U-shaped or just Harman. It kind of falls into both of those categories when you listen to it. And as I was talking about, the dynamic driver and the bass, the first thing that I noticed was the dynamic driver control. They didn't lower the level to make it sound cleaner. They used a better driver. It's pretty clear that they chose a really nice driver here. This is incredibly important when you have 3 other drivers that are sharper and faster, like I talked about. Would I have lowered the sub bass and put more energy into the mid bass to add body to the mids and turn it into a modified Harman like all the other sets? 100% that's what I would have done. So this idea of pushing all the energy out into the sub bass kind of works if you don't care a lot about any mid bass. And as I said, strict Harman where you're following a heavy sub bass and almost a very lean mid bass isn't necessarily my preference. I would have smoothed this out, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But yeah, not exactly my preferred bass shelf, but I understand what they did and why they did it and why they followed that target. And it works well for lots and lots of genres, but not all of them. But as I said, I would say the same thing on every set. It's too sub-bass focused at the expense of lower mids and impact. Again, when you bring the sub-bass down basically to the floor, there's not as much impact. It's kind of there, but not quite. It takes just a little bit of mid bass to positively affect everything else in the sound signature. And that's sort of my argument that I used on Dusk, and that's the argument that I'll use on SM4 as well. So on the mids, first thing I noticed was the tight bass, and the second thing I noticed that it's very U-shaped. It's really clean. No bass blip behind. It's just sharp, clean, transparent vocals. They did that very well. I think Simgot does that very well. They did it again very well on SM4. And if you're going to nitpick it, again, this is a Harman style nitpick. The lower is just too lean, the upper is too energetic at higher volume. There will be some male vocals that really sound pencil thin, like AC/DC. And again, that is just a strict Harman thing. That is exactly why there's a big market for modified Harman, why lots of brands use it. It tends to smooth out this male vocal, female vocal. You're trying to find a balance between having a very clean mid, but having just a little bit of body to the male vocals and still having energetic female vocals. There's an art to it, and Simgot tends to follow the target on rails very strictly, so that's sort of what you end up with. Or you can say that the lighter weight mids is either a brilliant marketing ploy to make you buy the EM10, that's a possibility, but like Dusk, I would say that these drivers deliver more with just a little bit of EQ, and volume plays a huge part in how you perceive the mids. I tend to listen to it at a little bit higher volume, so I will point out the lean lower mids, the over energetic upper mids. That's because I listen to it at a little slightly higher volume. But SM4 is quite resolving no matter what. But to really maintain that resolution and dynamic range, so it doesn't sound overly bright, you do need to limit your volume. And the treble, again, like I said, maybe the most complex part that they pulled off really well. They used a planar and a piezo to do the treble, and it works. There's no obvious peaks. There's no graininess or lack of resolve. But as I said, to be honest, Simgot tends to execute their treble levels very well on all of their sets. Kind of no matter what, they always have a smooth, really extended treble. SM4 is no different. No big surprise. They did a really nice treble here. Stage, I would say, it's pretty much projected Harman. It's not really at your ears. It does project around your head, but more of a flat wall of sound in front of you. If you want to add depth and more separation, do look into using EQ. So with that, we will kind of jump into something like that. So I'll call this one the Aftershow. And why are we doing this? Because SM4, much like Dusk, it appears or is described better than it is in the reviews. And I would say Dusk is the same thing. I said the same thing about Dusk. Kind of okay out of the box. The analog cable, kind of okay. The DSP cable, not as much. SM4, no DSP cable, but the Harman style tuning is not going to be everyone's cup of tea. Not necessarily my cup of tea. But, what's the real issue here? To really sound like a top-of-the-line set, it needs to be balanced like one. And I think Harman is just a little bit too thin, too bright, not enough dimension to vocals. And you end up with a really detailed, sharp sound. But in the end, it's kind of less detailed and less textured as it's saturated too bright, especially when you turn it up a little bit like I was talking about. So don't read into too much why I picked Dark Magician. It just happened to fit the model of EQ that I was using. But this is the gist of what I'm talking about to get it into a more balanced sound. So starting with the sub bass, and we can kind of follow along down here. So why would I lower the 100 hertz and lower? Why would I lower this little bit here? And we're lowering that because we're lowering the treble at the same time. And the bass will have more presence as soon as you lower the treble, less of a chance of sub bass ruining the stage. So if you're going to do this, you don't need to bump this so high because this is so high. If you're going to bring this down as well. That ends up with a cleaner bass shelf, something more of a glide as opposed to this ramp that they used. So why add a mid-bass bump between 100 to 500 hertz? That's kind of this area right there. And that's going to fix your male vocals, add the body that is missing from most Harman sets, add more impact to the bass, and that will add the back end to your front end attack and sound more natural, more texture, better dynamic range, and it gets you, lost. The dynamic range gets lost in the bright saturation. This will also expand the depth of the stage and bring it back to the back of your head where it should be on a top-of-the-line set. So again, lots and lots of things happen if you just increase this area just a tiny bit. I said the same exact thing on Dusk. I'll say the same thing on SM4. It makes a huge difference with a very small change, just adding some mid-bass. It's not like it ruins all the mids or anything. It just adds some body to the back end to it, gives you some depth, gives you some of that dimension, a lot of the things, and most important, it actually fixes the male vocals. So the treble I'll talk about sort of in parts. There's the first part kind of between 1 and 4. I would say just bring it down a little bit, 1 dB, just to take that extra emphasis off the upper mids. It actually fixes the stage too because now it becomes in more balance. And then maybe minus 2 dB, about 5 to 10. That really just brings down the over energetic guitars and electronic music. And then 14 to 20K, and that's sort of your choice. Very much there is a bump out there, and that bump is either going to be, you could perceive that depending on your source, maybe, maybe not. I noticed it pop out more on some sources than not, and that's why I call it the ESS option. I tended to notice it more on ESS. I got a dongle, the Let Sure dongle, ESS chip, boom, it's like 15K, kind of right near you hear it, and so you just have to lower it down, like 1 dB, and that should do it. But this will remove that bright spot when trying to raise the volume, so you could fully hear SM4's ability to resolve and textures. And that's sort of the gist and why I keep on harping on volume, is this Harman style tuning works pretty fine at medium and lower. As soon as you raise it too much, too bright, and it loses all of its balance. So to really regain all that balance, you do need to kind of drop this whole thing down just a little bit, 1 or 2 dB. Then the whole thing becomes a volume scaling beast, as a top of the line set should be. So is SM4 EQ going to be better than EM10? And I'll say that's not an obvious answer, and I would always kind of bet on a more neutral style tuning. So when I looked at the EM10 graph, I'm like, yeah, it's pretty V-shaped, more V-shaped than SM4. So I'm not going to swear that EM10 will beat my EQ'd SM4, but we're going to find out shortly. So that is what I got on the SM4. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.